Hello, this is Amr Playful. I'm going to talk about Modest Mussorgsky pictures at an exhibition. Okay, so Mussorgsky was born into a family who were very rich and possessed a great deal of land and workers. He studied piano from his mother when he was very young, since his mother was a trained pianist. A couple of years later, he started performing pieces in public by famous composers such as Franz Liszt. Then, as a young adult, he served in the army and then worked in the government. So, what is the Mighty Handful? He was a member of a group called the Five, which is also known as the Mighty Handful. This group contained five Russian composers. They studied and worked together to create a new style of music that felt very that they felt represented their Russian heritage. They wanted to create a distinct Russian classical music. So Mussorgsky never received any formal musical training, despite that he wrote several pieces that are still performed till this day. Mussorgsky is famous for his operas and songs, which are specific and suited for the voices that use the Russian language. He was sad and depressed most of his life due to the deaths of his mother and his friend Hartmann, which led to his alcoholic lifestyle. So these are his famous works: Boris Godunov, Night on About the Mountain, and Pictures at an Exhibition. So Boris Godunov is basically the only opera he completed in his lifetime. We move to Night on Bald Mountain. It was inspired by Russian and Gogol mythology. Mussorgsky's version doesn't have any kind of calm like the second half. The entire piece is one long whirlwind of evil, whereas other composers' versions changes character halfway through. So in other composers' version, they change the the tone and make it more light. So we want to focus on pictures at an exhibition. This is Mussorgsky's most famous piano composition, where it became a showpiece for virtuoso pianists. The composition is based on pictures by the artist and designer Victor Hartmann, who he died earlier. It is basically a remembrance of him. Okay, so the most two important innovations of Mussorgsky was he used dissonance and how he performed pictures at an exhibition. Okay, so dissonance was very scarce in his time and basically non-existent in most pieces and non-existent in most pieces in this romantic era. Romanticism is subjective and contains control of harmonic tension, which means balance between the dissonance and consonance notes. An example of dissonance is when two musical notes are not in harmony, and the consonance is the opposite. The second innovation being portrayed what is found inside the pictures of his deceased friend by using his own emotion and music. He gives these images life by infusing his imagination and emotions while portraying them in the piece he wrote. This was unheard of at that time, يعني. So he gave music a whole new meaning. Basically, he tries to give the listener a feeling of walking in an art gallery and stopping at various pictures along the way.
Hello, this is student 2. I'm Antauj and I'm going to be talking about Modest Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition. Now, Pictures at an Exhibition dwells in the nationalist genre, and the nationalist genre refers to the musical ideas, motifs that are identified within a specific country, region, or ethnicity. However, the Russian nationalism is very unique in a sense of Russian cultural unity and the individual identity of a person who is related to artistic work. And basically, talking about Pictures at an Exhibition, it was created in 1874 and it was written by Modest Mussorgsky because Modest Mussorgsky lost his dear friend Victor Hartmann, which was a very artistic painter at that time. So at first, Pictures at an Exhibition was made for solo pianists, and then Maurice Ravel made it an orchestral piece. So Pictures at an Exhibition is basically called this way because it is literally Mussorgsky going through an exhibition full of Hartmann's pictures, and each movement suggests an artwork that shows how Mussorgsky wove the movements into a cohesive whole. He originally composed it for piano, as I said, but audiences today know it as an orchestral piece. It's a musical portrait of the composer walking through the exhibit as well. Sometimes he is very slow while doing the walk or talking about a specific movement, and we're going to go through these 11 movements right now. First comes and I forgot to mention that this music or this piece is structured quite differently for its time. So it starts out with a promenade where the composer enters the exhibit and begins to view the artwork, which the promenade is heard through all of the composition. So we go and then move to the gnomus or the gnome, based on a picture of an ugly dwarf-shaped nutcracker, and you can hear the music and not voice, but basically the nutcracker cracking and stomping his feet. The third movement is presented by student number 4. After that, a brief play of the promenade goes through, and we move to the Tuilerius, written to evoke an image of the famous Paris gardens. It is a very light and quicker and sounds like scampering children that play as their nuns gossip about what is happening around them. Then we move on to the bidlow. The bidlow is basically polish for cattle, and this is based on cattle, basically an ox that is moving a wagon and is progressively coming closer to us, so we can hear so we can hear the ox coming closer, and the music getting higher. Then it's the ballet of the chicks in their shells. Basically, ballet is very light, quick, flighty, flashy as well. So we can just see that this movement is very bright and very nice, and it's like one of my favorites. The 7th movement is Samuel Goldberg and Shmuel. So basically, both of these are Jewish people, Jewish men. Samuel being the wealthy one, and Shmuel being from the ghetto. So Samuel is presented by a low pitch, demonstrating predominance over Shmuel, which is presented by a very high pitch. So meaning that the wealthy Jewish man has a advantage over the Jewish man from the ghetto. And the next movement is presented by student number 3. I'm not going to talk about that. Followed by this movement that's going to be presented by student 3 is the catacombs, based on a dark toned watercolor painting of the burial areas underneath Paris. So this is basically goes through a subsection titled by speaking of the dead in a dead language. So this is a very, as we can see, diverse in emotion, dark kind of movement, and it has really just shifted the mood from a very, very nice and calm and very light movement to a dark one. So the ninth movement is the most interesting in my opinion because it talks about Baba Yaga, which is a very known legend or myth inside of Russia. So what is Baba Yaga? Baba Yaga is basically a witch that flies using a mortar and a hut that has foul legs, and these foul legs resemble a chicken legs. So Baba Yaga basically hunts for prey at night, and one of Hartman's sketches were actually Baba Yaga but in a clock manner. The final movement, the Botir Gates, found in Kiev, were a simple design made by Hartman. So he made this design and won a competition. So these gates were supposed to be built, but the plans were later on cancelled because of something that happened. So this piece is special in my opinion because it was written in only 20 days in the memory of a great friend that in modest's eyes, this piece however, this piece is far more important than the art that Hartman has provided for the people, and thus it is still heard till today and still known till today more than Hartman's achievements or paintings. Um, we can say also that this is a very special piece because um, Modest went over these pictures as if he was in these pictures, basically something that hasn't been done before. He portrayed his views, Hartman's views, and both of their feelings while doing this piece. So this is why, in short, it is very special as well because the music is entitled to not one, not two, not three, but 11 pictures that were created by Hartman. And as well as uh, at that time, dissonance was not very popular per se, so he used dissonance and tampered with it inside his songs and and in these movements precisely, which was very unheard at the time, making it unique in a lot more ways.
Pictures at an exhibition. Movement 8, Catacomb. The eighth movement of pictures at an exhibition is named Catacombs. Catacombs is one of the Hartman's paintings that inspired Mussorgsky's musical sketches. It illustrated Hartman along with architect Kennel and a guide holding a lamp walking through the catacombs beneath streets of Paris that hold the skulls and remains of more than 6 million people. This gives us a hint that the eighth movement is about death and tragedy. Section Catacombs, Roman tomb of the eighth movement does not have a defined structure or harmonic foundation, which makes it special in its own way. It starts with no pause or no slow introduction. Instead, the opening beat strikes the listeners like a haunting echo in the catacombs. It abruptly takes the listeners from the world of living to that of the dead. In this first section, the brass choirs play together, performing abrupt dynamic changes from fortissimo to pianissimo and soft forte to piano. These unusual dynamic changes, along with the harmonic shifts, create sound effects. Those sound effects that are interrupted by short rests illustrate the splendidness, stillness, and echo of the catacomb. Moreover, music stepwise motion for the harmony and fermatas and pauses for rhythm create the effect of literally going underground to the ambiguous passageways. Thus in this section the catacomb along with the skulls, darkness and water are all represented through the alternation of loud and soft melody. This section ends with a tom-tom sound like reading and thus the tempo changes from largo to andante, introducing the second section with the death in a dead language. In the second section, the violins, crescendos, bass drums, and oboe all together lead to the formation of sound effects. The oboe plays a melancholic and gloomy melody that represents the despondency, sorrows, and grief of Mussorgsky. Mussorgsky's attention was drawn to this painting on a very profound and deep level. This picture in specific has portrayed the fact that he has lost his friend. The catacomb and skulls all depicted death, and he was still mourning over the fact that his friend passed away. Moreover, he felt emotionally close to this picture, which was shown from the slow tempo and rather short length. Also, the pianismo dynamic is an expressive intonation of the nostalgia and remembrance of their emotional qualities that Mussorgsky is feeling. Besides, the tremolo violins illustrate the image of the flickering lights in the catacomb. This shows how much Mussorgsky is drawn into this picture as if he is imagining himself standing down there with them. Furthermore, the articulation being legato shows that Mussorgsky is very caught in the moment and drowning in his despair, that he can no longer feel the horror of the skulls and the catacomb. Thus in this section, the misery and nostalgia are represented. However, near the end, the music brightens and a hint of heavenly is added, probably to show that Mussorgsky hopes his friend is now free of all kinds of pain and is in a better place. It's important to note that this movement is of ABC form and B minor key. In a nutshell, this movement, catacomb, is one of the most important movements of pictures at an exhibition. For first, it has portrayed the dark side of death and its horrors. Second, it has illustrated the negative emotions of agony and reminiscence of Mussorgsky. Last, it has ended in a little brighter mood of heavenly emotions. Thank you.
Hi. A perfect way to describe Modest Mussorgsky's beautiful pictures at an exhibition is as follows. Each and every movement is by itself a rather painting by the talented artist Victor Hartmann, to whom this piece was dedicated. Meaning that the first movement, Promenade, begins when the viewer enters the exhibit and sees the first artwork. Now, the second movement, Nomius, which is Latin for no, is basically the viewer seeing a pretty hideous picture of a nutcracker. And the third movement, the Old Castle, I would be analyzing today. But before, it is noteworthy to say that while moving from movement 2 to 3, the same melodic theme, Promenade, is being repeated once again to display how the viewer was moving from an artwork to another. Now, what about the Old Castle? It is, by all means, Hartmann's perfect depiction of an old Italian medieval castle in which a troubadour sings accompanied by his lute. Now, before I elaborate furthermore, let me just say that the composer gave great importance to human speech throughout his work, meaning that when he was fascinated by the macabre in Hartmann's work, he tried to insert it through musicality and articulation. A perfect example on the matter is in the introduction, which is, in, of course, G sharp minor, the main tonality. The example is as follows. The lute is represented by 3 quavers, followed by an 8th note. Now, and their importance lies in the following. Their articulation at first is staccato, leading to portato, having great significance in context, and of course the beautiful legato finally, to introduce the troubadour's first intervention, also known as theme A. Here's the theme played on the piano. And that was the first introduction. Having played that, the troubadour makes his first intervention. And basically, it's a lyrical, melodic, melancholic line. And it was kind of haunted. Now, why was it haunted? The mystery of Mussorgsky's music lies in the following dilemma. Is this troubadour a ghost returning to his old castle to serenade his long-dead lover? And here's the troubadour's theme on the piano. And etc. So the dark, mysterious imagination was correlated back then to what Gothic and dark stories Russia had to reflect, therefore highlighting a national theme, which was not a surprise to Mussorgsky, granted that he was a nationalist. Now, theme A is accompanied by the lute's intervention, then marking its way as theme A prime. Theme A prime is then followed by another intervention of the lute, which then follows up a theme B. And the theme B is repeated once more as theme B prime, but now it's more prolonged, and so on and so forth, until the progression reaches its climax, and it finally stops, and the harmony just changes, implying that the troubadour has made an improvised singing showing his skills. And at last, just when we thought that the music is finished on a pianissimo, Mussorgsky suddenly used what is called a cadence plagale, which means a 4/1 degree, to surprise the audience, leaving in fortissimo, just leaving the listener in a state of an abrupt and immediate state of shock. And this is basically how the movement finishes, by the viewer leaving from the old castle to the Tuileries. And basically that being displayed by the same melodic theme repeated throughout all the movement, which is the promenade theme once again. Thank you.